97 people walked into a football stadium on a Saturday afternoon and never walked out. For 23 years, the police said it was their fault. The government said it was their fault. The newspapers said it was their fault. Every single word of that was a lie. Carefully constructed. Deliberately maintained. By the people whose job it was to protect them. A government agency dosed its own citizens with LSD without their knowledge or consent and watched what happened. Children in Canadian orphanages were falsely certified as mentally ill so that a government could claim higher medical funding. Nazi scientists who ran experiments on concentration camp prisoners were quietly given American identities and put to work for the US government. And a pharmaceutical company knew their drug was destroying unborn children and kept selling it. 5 cover-ups. 5 institutions. 5 times that the people who were supposed to protect you chose not to. Everything in this video is documented. Officially acknowledged. Court proven. Parliamentary confirmed. None of this is speculation. None of this is conspiracy theory. This is what happened when institutions decided that their own survival was worth more than the lives of the people inside them. Pay attention, because every single one of these cases was believed to be impossible, right up until it wasn't. April 15th, 1989. Sheffield, England. The FA Cup semi-final between Liverpool and Nottingham Forest. Hillsborough Stadium. One of the most important football matches of the English season. Tens of thousands of supporters travelling from across the country. Families, friends, fathers and sons. People who had done this dozens of times before. Who knew the routine. Who trusted that someone had planned for their safety. That trust was misplaced. Catastrophically. And fatally. The Leppings Lane end. A terrace behind the goal. Enclosed. Fenced. Caged. Because in the 1980s, English football authorities had decided that the best way to prevent crowd disorder was to pen supporters inside metal enclosures like animals. The pens had a maximum safe capacity. On April 15th, a decision was made by the police match commander to open a large exit gate to relieve congestion outside the ground. Gate C. The supporters poured in, directly into pens that were already full. The pressure built. People at the front were crushed against the perimeter fencing. They couldn't breathe. They couldn't move. They couldn't get out. And for critical minutes, the police did not understand what they were seeing. The ambulance service was not given access to the pitch for 40 minutes. 40 minutes. Supporters tore down advertising hoardings and used them as stretchers because no stretchers came. Police officers stood and watched rather than helping the injured. The match was not stopped immediately. Decisions that should have taken seconds took minutes. Minutes that cost lives. 97 people died. The youngest was 10 years old. His name was John Paul Gilhooly. He was there with his cousin. He never came home. Within days, the cover-up began. South Yorkshire Police briefed a Conservative MP who then briefed the press agency that fed the story to newspapers. The story was this: Liverpool supporters had been drunk and disorderly. They had forced the gate. They had pickpocketed the dead. They had attacked a police officer who was trying to give mouth to mouth. Every single element of this story was fabricated. The Sun newspaper ran it on their front page under the headline, "The Truth." It was the opposite of the truth. And it would stand, officially and publicly, for 23 years. Police statements were altered. Officers were asked to review and amend their accounts of the day. A computer system was used to track which statements had been changed and how. The purpose was singular: to shift blame from the police and onto the supporters. Witness accounts that contradicted the official narrative were suppressed. Medical evidence about survival time, suggesting that some of those who died might have lived with faster intervention, was buried. An entire apparatus of the British state was deployed, not to find out what happened, but to ensure that what happened was never honestly told. The families of the 97 did not stop. For 23 years they campaigned. They were dismissed. They were called troublemakers. They were told to accept the official narrative and move on. They did not move on. In 2012, the Hillsborough Independent Panel published its report. It concluded that the original inquest verdicts of accidental death were wrong, that the police had altered statements, that supporters had not caused the disaster, that more lives could have been saved. In 2016, a new inquest jury took 2 years to reach their verdict. Unlawful killing. 97 counts. Unlawful killing. 27 years after they died. No police officer has been successfully prosecuted for the deaths at Hillsborough. No officer has served a prison sentence. The match commander, David Duckenfield, was found not guilty of gross negligence manslaughter in 2019. The men who altered statements, the men who briefed the false narrative to the press, the editors who published the lies, have faced consequences that in no way match what they did. 97 people are dead, and the question that the families have asked for 35 years remains unanswered. Not who was responsible. We know who was responsible. But why has not one of them paid a price that comes close to the price that 97 people paid on that terrace? 1953. The Cold War is at its peak. The United States government is afraid. Not of bombs. Not of armies. Of minds. Specifically of the possibility that Soviet and Chinese intelligence have developed techniques to control human thought, to create sleeper agents, to break a person's will and rebuild it in any shape they choose. And so the CIA did what intelligence agencies do when they are afraid. They decided to do it first. Project MKUltra, a covert research program into mind control, funded by the United States government, conducted on United States citizens, without their knowledge, without their consent, for 20 years. 150 separate research projects, conducted at universities, hospitals, prisons, and mental institutions across the United States and Canada. The subjects, prisoners who were told the experiments were unrelated to what was being done to them. Mental patients who had no capacity to consent. Members of the public who walked into what they believed were legitimate medical appointments. And in some documented cases, CIA employees themselves who did not know they were being dosed. The methods: LSD, mescaline, barbiturates, hypnosis, sensory deprivation, sleep deprivation, electroconvulsive therapy beyond any therapeutic dosage, and something the documents refer to simply as psychological harassment. Frank Olson was a U.S. Army biochemist working with the CIA. In November 1953, he was given a drink at a work retreat. He was not told the drink contained LSD. He had no idea he was part of an experiment. Days later, Frank Olson fell from a window of the Statler Hotel in New York City. He fell 13 stories. The official ruling was suicide. His family accepted this. For 20 years, they had no reason not to. Then in 1975, the Church Committee investigations into CIA abuses released declassified documents. Frank Olson's family discovered that he had been drugged without his knowledge days before his death. And they began to ask a different question. Not did he fall, but was he pushed? In 1973, CIA Director Richard Helms ordered the destruction of all MKUltra files. He knew the Senate investigations were coming. He knew what the documents contained. He ordered them destroyed. Almost all of them were. But a clerical error saved 20,000 documents that had been misfiled in a financial records building. Those documents were discovered in 1977. They became the foundation of the Senate hearings that confirmed MKUltra had existed. Without that clerical error, the program would have remained exactly what the CIA intended it to be. A secret. Forever. The 20,000 surviving documents represent a fraction of what existed. The rest was ash. What the surviving files reveal is disturbing enough. Subproject 68 at McGill University in Montreal subjected psychiatric patients to months of drug-induced sleep, repeated electroconvulsive therapy, and looped audio messages played for 20 hours a day. Patients emerged with no memory of who they were. Some never recovered. No one who authorized MKUltra was ever charged with a crime. Not one person. So here is the question that the destroyed files made impossible to answer. What was in the documents that Richard Helms decided the world could never be allowed to see? Maurice Duplessis was Premier of Quebec from 1936 to 1959. He was also, in the words of the survivors of what happened under his administration, a man who sold children. Not in the way that phrase is usually meant. In a way that was, in some respects, worse. Because what he sold was their identity, their sanity, their future. And he did it with the cooperation of the Catholic Church, the Quebec government, and the medical profession. And he did it because there was money in it. In Quebec in the 1940s and 1950s, orphanages received a government subsidy of approximately $1.25 per child per day. Psychiatric institutions received $2.75 per patient per day. The difference was significant. Multiplied across thousands of children. Across decades. The solution devised by the Duplessis government, in cooperation with the Catholic Church that ran the orphanages, was elegant in its cruelty. Healthy children in orphanages were reclassified, certified as mentally ill, by physicians who knew they were not, and transferred to psychiatric institutions where they could generate more funding. Children who were perfectly healthy, given false diagnoses, institutionalized, for money. Once reclassified, these children entered a different world. Psychiatric institutions that were not equipped for children, that were not staffed for children, where they lived alongside adults with severe mental illness, where they were subjected to treatments that had no therapeutic justification for a healthy child. Electroconvulsive therapy, lobotomies, experimental drug treatments, physical and sexual abuse that survivors have described in testimonies that are among the most disturbing documents in Canadian history. They were children. They had done nothing. They had been sold to an institution because the institution paid more per head than the orphanage. And the institution did what institutions do when the people inside them have no one advocating for them. Whatever it wanted. The survivors began speaking publicly in the 1990s. They formed an organization. They sought acknowledgement. They sought compensation. They sought criminal charges against those responsible. The Quebec government conducted reviews. The Catholic Church expressed regret. A compensation package was eventually offered, approximately $10,000 per survivor, for childhood spent in psychiatric institutions, for experimental procedures performed on healthy children, 4 decades of silence, for the theft of their identity and their sanity, $10,000. Most of the perpetrators were dead. Nobody was charged. Nobody was prosecuted. The church apologized. The government apologized. And then considered the matter closed. In 1999, survivors made a discovery. On the grounds of the former Saint Jean de Dieu Psychiatric Hospital in Montreal, they found unmarked graves. Dozens of them. The remains of children who had died inside the institution and been buried without ceremony, without markers, without their families being notified. Some of these children had been used after death for medical dissection. Their bodies sold to medical schools. They had been sold twice. First when they were alive, then when they were dead. The Quebec government commissioned an investigation into the graves. The investigation was inconclusive. The graves remain. Survivors estimate that between 20,000 and 50,000 children were falsely certified and institutionalized under the Duplessis scheme. The range is that wide because the records were incomplete, because institutions were not required to justify the certifications, because nobody was watching. These were orphans, children without parents, without advocates, without anyone whose job it was to notice. And the people who built the system knew that. They chose children who had no one to complain on their behalf. So here is the question that no government review has answered. Who signed the first false certification? Who looked at a healthy child and wrote mentally ill on a form and filed it? And did they ever, once, lie awake at night and think about what they had done? May 1945. Germany has surrendered. The Allied forces are moving through the ruins of the Third Reich. They are finding things. Laboratories. Research facilities. Filing cabinets full of documents that describe experiments conducted on human beings in concentration camps. Experiments in hypothermia, in pressure, in infectious disease, in nerve agents, in surgical procedures performed without anesthesia. The scientists who ran these programs are being arrested. They are war criminals. Their work is evidence of crimes against humanity. What happened next is one of the most carefully hidden decisions in American history. The Joint Intelligence Objectives Agency, a U.S. government body. Their task was to identify German scientists of value to American military and aerospace programs. Their method was this: review the scientists' Nazi credentials and war crimes involvement, and then, where necessary, alter, sanitize, or simply remove those records. Replace them with new documentation describing the scientist as a person of no political significance, an apolitical technician, a man who had simply done his job. Give them an American visa. Give them a new life. And put them to work. The program was classified. Its existence was denied. And it brought over 1,600 German scientists, engineers, and technicians into the United States. The most famous name in Operation Paperclip is Wernher von Braun, rocket scientist, visionary, the man who would become director of NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center, the man who designed the Saturn V rocket that sent Americans to the moon. Von Braun was also a member of the Nazi Party, a member of the SS. And the V-2 rockets he designed for the Third Reich were built using slave labor from concentration camps. Workers who were worked to death. In tunnels. Building weapons for a regime that had classified them as subhuman. Von Braun knew. Survivors said he visited the facilities. He saw the conditions. He built his rockets anyway. And America gave him a parade. The justification given, then and now, was necessity. The Soviet Union was also recruiting German scientists. A Cold War arms race required the best minds regardless of their history. The knowledge inside these men's heads was worth more than the crimes attached to their names. This was the calculation. Knowledge over justice. Utility over accountability. And this calculation was made by officials who had seen the photographs from the camps, who had read the survivor testimonies, who knew exactly what these men had done and to whom. and decided that winning the next war was worth more than justice for the last one. Operation Paperclip was declassified in 1999. The records exist. The names are known. The justifications were made public. What has never been publicly addressed is this: the survivors. The people who were worked to death in the tunnels of Mittelwerk building von Braun's rockets. The people who died in the pressure experiments, in the hypothermia tanks, in the surgical theaters of the camps. They got no parade. They got no new country. They got no new name. They got unmarked graves and the knowledge that the men responsible were given American citizenship and government salaries and buildings named after them. So the question is simple. Was the moon landing worth it? And who exactly got to make that decision? 1957. West Germany. A pharmaceutical company called Chemie Grünenthal releases a new drug. They market it as safe. Completely safe. Safe for everyone. Safe for pregnant women. They call it thalidomide. It is sold as a sedative, as a treatment for morning sickness, as something that will help expectant mothers sleep and eat and endure the difficult early months of pregnancy. It is prescribed by doctors across Europe, Canada, and Australia. Between 1957 and 1961, it is given to tens of thousands of pregnant women, and it destroys their children. Thalidomide interferes with limb development in a fetus. Taken during the first trimester, precisely when morning sickness is worst, precisely when it was prescribed, it causes catastrophic and irreversible damage. Children were born without arms, without legs, with flippers where their limbs should have been, with damage to their eyes, ears, hearts, and internal organs. Approximately 10,000 children worldwide were born with thalidomide-related disabilities. Another 80,000 to 120,000 pregnancies ended in miscarriage or stillbirth. These numbers are estimates, because Grünenthal did not want the numbers to be known. The evidence suggests that Grünenthal knew. Internal documents, revealed in legal proceedings decades later, showed that the company had received reports of neurological damage in adult patients as early as 1959. They did not withdraw the drug. Reports connecting the drug to birth defects began emerging in 1960. They did not withdraw the drug. A German pediatrician named Wiederkind Lenz publicly connected thalidomide to the birth defects in late 1961. Grünenthal withdrew the drug in Germany in November 1961. But in the United Kingdom, the drug continued to be sold for several more weeks. Not because the evidence was unclear, because stopping required admitting what the evidence meant. The United States was largely spared because of one person, Francis Kelsey, a pharmacologist working for the FDA. Grünenthal's American partner applied to have thalidomide approved for sale in the United States. Kelsey reviewed the application. She was not satisfied that the drug's safety had been adequately established. She refused to approve it. The company pressured her, called her obstructionist, complained to her supervisors. She refused again, and again. She continued to refuse until the evidence of the birth defects emerged, and the application was withdrawn. Francis Kelsey prevented one of the worst pharmaceutical disasters in history from reaching America. She was a single FDA reviewer who said no, and held the line. In 1968, Grünenthal faced criminal charges in Germany. The case was settled out of court in 1970. No executives served prison time. The compensation paid to survivors was, by most assessments, inadequate. In 2012, 51 years after the drug was withdrawn, Grunenthal's chief executive gave a public apology. He said the company felt deep regret. He said Grunenthal had faced the reality of its past. Survivors noted that the apology came a year before the last patents related to thalidomide were set to expire, meaning it had no financial cost attached to it. The people who made the decisions that killed and disabled tens of thousands of children were never held to account in any meaningful way. Not one of them. Not once. Thalidomide survivors are in their 60s now. They have lived their entire lives with the consequences of a decision made in a boardroom before they were born. A decision to keep selling a drug after the evidence of what it did was already in the company's hands. The people who made that decision are dead. They died in comfort, in retirement, with their names attached to no criminal conviction. So the question that thalidomide asks, the question that every one of these 5 cases asks, is the same. At what point does an institution become more afraid of the consequences of the truth than of the act that created it? Because that is the moment the cover-up begins. And that moment, in every single one of these cases, came very early indeed. 5 cover-ups, 5 institutions, a police force, an intelligence agency, a government and a church, a military program, a pharmaceutical company, different countries, different decades, different methods, but the same structure every single time. An act is committed. Evidence of the act accumulates. A decision is made that the cost of disclosure is higher than the cost of concealment. And then the machinery begins. Documents are altered. Witnesses are discredited. Narratives are constructed. And the people who are harmed are told, directly or indirectly, that their version of events is wrong. Their experience is wrong. Their suffering is wrong. That the institution knows better. That the institution is to be trusted. That the institution, this time, is telling the truth. The lesson of every single one of these cases is the same. Institutions do not self-correct. They self-protect. The Hillsborough truth came because families refused to stop asking. The MKUltra truth came because a clerical error misfiled 20,000 documents that were meant to be destroyed. The Duplessis truth came because survivors organized and spoke publicly against every incentive to stay silent. The Operation Paperclip truth came because a researcher filed a Freedom of Information request in 1999. The thalidomide truth came because a single FDA reviewer said no. Every single truth in this video survived because of one thing. One person, who refused to accept what they were told, and kept asking anyway. 97 people. Thousands of experimental subjects. 20,000 children. 1,600 war criminals. Tens of thousands of families with disabled children. Every single one of them was told, at some point, by someone in a position of authority, that what they knew to be true was not true. That what they had experienced had not happened the way they said. That the institution knew better. Every single one of those institutions was eventually proven wrong. After years. After decades. After lifetimes. After it was too late for most of the people it mattered to most. So ask yourself, what else is being covered up right now? By an institution you currently trust. And how long will it take this time? Before someone refuses to stop asking. If you're still watching, you already understand why these cases matter. Not as history. As instruction. Every cover-up in this video worked for years. Some worked for decades. They worked because people trusted institutions more than they trusted the people those institutions had harmed. NightTrace exists for the cases that are still working. The ones that haven't been forced open yet. The ones where the families are still asking and nobody with a platform is amplifying the question. Subscribe. Not because of the algorithm. Because someone has to keep asking. and most people have already moved on.